Hello, I'm Dr. Emily Helder. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist and a professor of psychology, and I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan. While there are many reasons to have concerns about the scientific rigor and the use of evidence in the CRC's Human Sexuality Report, I have particularly grave concerns about the gender section. I'll provide a couple of examples in this video, but this is far from exhaustive. There's a lot more that we could say. First, the report either ignores or misrepresents the conclusions of existing research and uses descriptive and correlational research to reach causal conclusions. For example, in discussing the causes of gender dysphoria, the report relies on a single study to conclude that children and teens are strongly influenced by media regarding gender identity, and they advocate for the existence of rapid onset gender dysphoria, relying on a single study. The study that the report writers used to support these causal claims ultimately actually had to be retracted and corrected. And it's not due to lack of sensitivity, as the CRC report alleges in their footnotes, but because there's problems with the study. There's biased participant recruitment. The study relied solely on parent reports and didn't ask for teen reports at all. And because these significant methodological limitations of the study were not adequately discussed in the paper when it was originally published. Additionally, the study was descriptive in nature. And as the actual author of the study stated, when they were required to submit a retraction and a revision of the study, I'll quote here, "Descriptive studies often represent a first inquiry into the area of research, and the findings of descriptive studies are used to generate new hypotheses that can be tested in subsequent research. Because of the known limitations of descriptive studies, claims about causal associations cannot be made." So, in summary, the study that the report writers used to support their causal claims about media influence on gender dysphoria is not designed to be used to support causal claims, and it's also a poor quality study in the first place. Second, repeatedly, when the report draws on research, it has cherry-picked studies of poorer quality and represented them as settled science and ignored the overwhelming consensus of the research findings that have reached the opposite conclusion. For example, the report summarizes the existing recommendations by the American Medical Association and the Pediatric Endocrine Society that support transition for transgender individuals, but then criticizes these statements, saying that very little research has yet been done, and suggests that for a sizable group, psychological morbidity, which are psychological symptoms, is unaffected by or actually increases after surgical transition. It's just not true. In fact, the size of the literature on post-transition outcomes is actually quite sizable, and it's growing. The report just didn't choose to engage with it at all. Also, the study that the report uses to suggest that transition doesn't improve or may worsen psychiatric outcomes is a single study with a very small sample size. In contrast, scientists have used meta-analysis, which is a procedure used in research design where you can combine and summarize findings from multiple studies, thus giving you hundreds of participants to draw on for the results. And they've looked at psychological outcomes post-transition. These meta-analyses have found that although for many transgender people, psychopathology and psychiatric disorders at the time that they're receiving services are higher than the cis population, they found that those outcomes do improve following gender-confirming medical interventions, and in many cases are comparable to the cis population after treatment. A second example emerges when the report attempts to make the case that gender dysphoria de-cis or resolves in, as they say, almost all children. They cite Steensma as a study that supports this. To look at the Steensma study, they defined persisters as participants who, after presenting to the clinic with gender dysphoria as children, returned as teens for medical treatment. And they defined everybody who did not come back to the clinic as teens as D-sisters. Clearly, there are many reasons why those participants may not have returned to the clinic, but were still self-identifying as transgender or gender fluid, because Steensma, the study, has been criticized for this reason. They publicly clarified that in their study, and here I quote them, using the term desistance in this way does not imply anything about the identity of the desisters. The children could still be hesitating, searching, fluctuating, or exploring with regard to their gender experience and expression, and trying to figure out how they want to live. The assumption that we considered all desisters as having a fixed cisgender identity is therefore an incorrect one. So there are both problems with the study that the CRC report utilizes to support its claim of almost all children with gender dysphoria will be comfortable with their anatomical sex. And even the study's own authors clearly do not want their study to be used to support that kind of claim. Third, and finally, in place of research, the report repeatedly relies heavily on biased opinion blogs or on statements from organizations that have been widely discredited. Specifically, when discussing the treatment of gender dysphoria in children, the report incorrectly portrays an even split between professionals at the American Academy of Pediatrics that are advocating for access to transition treatments for adolescents, and those saying that those treatments are intrusive or harmful, like the American College of Pediatricians. Although their names sound similar, these groups are not the same. The American College of Pediatricians is an advocacy group that's attempting to pose as a real medical organization. They have a handful of employees, less than 500 members. They've been roundly criticized by the researchers whose science they use and misrepresent to support their erroneous conclusions. Even Dr. Francis Collins, who's the director of the NIH and himself a deeply committed Christian, has publicly denounced the ACP for misrepresenting his work. The fact that this report presents the ACP on equal footing as the American Academy of Pediatrics, which has over 67,000 members and is responsible for the board certification process of pediatricians, and then goes on to further advocate for the ACP as an alternative to the more liberal American Academy of Pediatrics, demonstrates the serious biases in this section of the report. They are lending credibility to a fringe group. In addition to this particularly egregious example, the report repeatedly uses blog opinion posts, some of which are from websites with a particularly biased agenda, and they attempt to use those to support scientific claims about the treatment of gender dysphoria and the neuroscience of sex and gender. These types of evidence cannot and should not be used in the place of a deep and rich scientific literature that exists on these topics. To summarize, the report currently lacks appropriate engagement with existing scientific literature regarding gender identity and gender dysphoria. And in its place, it presents biased, discredited, and cherry-picked articles and blog posts, seemingly selected to support a predetermined conclusion.